Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Free Speech Forward podcast. This project that is a joint effort between 1776 Forward, the organization that I co founded with my co host here, Chris, and also the Institute for Liberal Values. And today we're here with, I want to call her a soul sister because we're going to be talking, I think, about religion, atheism, free speech, and also having a side hustle, having a passion project that perhaps isn't just your day job. I think everyone knows here that Chris and I each have day jobs of our own, but yet we're still here doing this project because we're passionate about it. And so I'm excited to hear from Susanna and her passions as well. So, Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you and you can introduce the world to Susanna.
Great. And thanks, Susanna, for joining us today. It's great to have you.
Thank you.
So for all of our listeners out there, we've got Susanna McIntyre on, and Susanna is a passionate advocate for free expression and critical thinking with a focus on eradicating harmful traditional practices. Over the past 4 years, Susanna has been the president and CEO of Atheist Republic, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting those who have left religion and aiding individuals experiencing persecution, particularly ex-Muslims. So with that background, and that's just one of the many endeavors I know she's engaged in. So, but we'll let her decide how much she wants to go into that. But why don't we just start out by telling us, Susanna, how you got into these issues of promoting free speech and being a leader for liberal values?
Yeah, it's a bit of a long story, and it makes most people's eyes go because long story short, I actually had a time in my early 20s that I spent in Antifa. And see, that's the expression I'm used to.
Yeah.
And I, through a series of events in my
Would not have
life,
guessed that for what it's worth.
Yeah. Basically, I was going through a process of unpacking my beliefs and trying to get myself kind of out of this sphere and this culture. And one thing that really captured my attention and made me deeply reassess my values and what I was promoting at that time was I became aware of the case of several Iranian political prisoners. And they're political prisoners because they are accused of blasphemy. And I was like, what in the world? Like, there's blasphemy laws still on the books around the world, and there's apostasy laws still on the books around the world. And I was thinking, oh my God, like I completed a secondary degree. Like I've never heard about any of this. How are we not talking about this? And it started just this process of me diving fully into that space because I couldn't believe that this was something that was not discussed or talked about. It was glossed over. And that I was surrounded in a culture that was really interrogating whether free expression is a true value. And then through a series of processes and also studying critical thinking and cult indoctrination in a structured way, really settled, no, this is a fundamental, this is a primary value that everything else derives from. And it's important that we're very, very clear about that. And I just started to dive in because what I started to discover was so contrary to what I had believed to be true. And me loving things that are taboo and unusual, I just couldn't stay away.
A little bit of that contrarian spirit, huh?
Yeah, I guess so.
And I love the journeys of, I was this before and now I'm something else. So you've gotta kind of end the story for us. So how did you even make the transition from Antifa to where you are now?
Basically I was going through a process of really trying to understand myself and a lot of experiences I'd gone through earlier in life, and make sense of, I grew up in a Catholic family. I'm a bisexual person, became an atheist, like feeling very deeply alienated from many of the moral systems that I grew up in. And in many ways that pushed me into the far left.
Mm.
And that being said, I still had all these emotional hangups over basically like religious trauma in one way or another, where I think people go through this where like you rationally do not hold the belief, but emotionally I beat myself up over certain things.
Oh yeah.
So certain things I'm taught to believe are sins and so forth. Whereas I would never tell one of my friends, oh, you're a horrible person because of XYZ behavior. But I'm deeply struggling with self-loathing towards myself because of it. But intellectually, like I know I don't believe that, right? So I was trying to sort through those issues on a personal level. And I studied psychology. That's what I got my degree in. I've always been very interested in cult psychology, indoctrination. And so I started to read a book by Dr. Stephen Hassan, which is called Combating Cult Mind Control. He's a survivor of cult abuse himself. And his model for how different systems of control begin and influence an individual, coercive control, undue influence, etc. And the funny thing was, you guys, well, I was over here thinking that I was just looking into this to try to understand why I have such deep emotional hangups over things I don't rationally believe, trying to sort through and untangle that. I started to notice that there are all these behaviors and patterns that I can't help but seem familiar in some of the other things I was involved in my life. So here I am trying to deal with being a recovering Catholic. And instead, what I realize is I'm like, oh, wait, I'm recognizing that some of this is ringing true for this whole other sphere of my life that I'm involved in. Maybe I should look at that a little bit. So
Wow.
that's kind of how things got started. And one of the things that Dr. Hassan talks about in his book is basically purposefully seeking out critical information. So I started to adopt some of his practices and literally just do critical thinking in like a structured way. And so I would practice because I'm such a nerd, and I would go watch debates. And it's very easy to find like atheist Christian debates online. There's a million of them. And so I'd watch those and try to practice if I could identify logical fallacies. And however, me being a proper, woke, down for the cause ally, I'm like, no, I'm supposed to be like this progressive person. I'm supposed to value diversity. Like, let's go seek out the experiences of people who left like different religions and watch the debates that they're doing, et cetera, et cetera. Because, me living in the Bay Area, I got part of my degree in critical gender studies. I mean, it's just postmodern all the way down. You're just, in my education, it was not presented of like, this is a way of approaching sociology. It's like, this is the correct way. Like, this is what intelligent people think, right? So me following my values, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go watch some of these other groups and diverse experiences. And so I would just go like ex-Hindu versus blah, blah, blah. Ex-Muslim versus Muslim, blah, blah, blah. And basically I discovered the ex-Muslim community that way. And that's part of how I kind of got exposed to this issue of blasphemy and apostasy, hearing about people that actually grew up in authoritarian governments, because when I was in Antifa, I was fully, and I try to explain this to people, fully under the belief that I was living or approaching a fascist government here in this country. I operated under that belief. And hearing their experiences and everything that they had to sacrifice to come here for the opportunity to express their criticism that I express towards the religion that I grew up in any day of the week, and no one bats an eye. It just really inflamed like my internal convictions, because I thought it was so, and it still gets me fired up, so wrong and hypocritical how so many of these people, who are dissidents, who had to sacrifice more than I will ever have to sacrifice, turn around and get stabbed in the back by people who are supposed to be the liberals on their side, who are instead caping and carrying water for the conservatives within their society that are preventing progress within their own nation, because they're being the ultra conservatives are being validated as the true representatives of those people. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so it spun me into that whole space. I started to hear things I'd never heard before. I realized, oh my gosh, like this is something that's been totally whitewashed my whole life. And then that just opened the floodgates.
I mean, sounds like I love that story, and sounds like your own arc is itself, I mean, not to put words in your mouth, but is kind of a perfect example of the value of free speech and certainly the free exchange of ideas, that you were able to even get the resources and education that you were seeking to kind of answer some of these questions you had. So I guess I'll just turn it back to you if you have anything that you pull out from that kind of, if you had to distill what to you is the central value of free speech, both to you personally and society at large, kind of how you would frame it.
One thing that I think about often is something that comes from Dr. Hassan's work, where I can't remember how he phrases it verbatim, but basically this idea of that truth will always stand under scrutiny. And that speaks to me so much. I think about this in many different levels, you know, like so many scientific discoveries first started as blasphemies, for example. But that's so much more expansive than that, right? Because there's so many movements from many different communities or culturally on several different levels of society to chill expression, to chill dissent. But I just always think about, well, if what you are saying is true, then you have no need to fear criticism, because no matter how much criticism and scrutiny you throw at it, it should remain to be true. You know? So if that's the case, we don't need to be fearful of scrutiny and dissent. And that's one of the most important elements of free expression, is our ability to examine, to interrogate, to help this bring us new prosperity and new findings, that so we can adjust our tactics to learn and grow and adapt and advance. Like it's so fundamental. It goes beyond any particular creed or ideology. And that's the biggest thing to me, is truth will always stand under scrutiny. So if what you believe to be true, then why are you so afraid of the scrutiny? Why are you trying to shut down the dissent and the criticism? It right. Shouldn't be necessary if it's so self-evident.
I would absolutely agree with that. And I want to share one thing I really find inspiring in your story is that, as you pointed out, you clearly weren't taught these values of critical thinking. You were taught this is a viewpoint, this is what all the intelligent people think, but you managed to find this field of critical thinking and learn from it and apply it and benefit from it. I'm curious what you would say, like what have been some of your biggest insights, or what are some of the most important tools or techniques of critical thinking that you found for others who have been in the same position as you, who are getting the same education that you got where they weren't taught critical thinking? What would be some of the most important aspects of critical thinking that you would want to share with others so that they can go on their own kind of journey?
There's like a personal element of it in terms of how you conduct like engaging in that kind of practice or process, and then there's a social like outward facing element to it.
I like that.
So
Yep.
from just a personal individual inside yourself aspect, I think just I love the kind of Cartesian practice of he had the comparison of the barrel of apples, right? Where he compared all of his beliefs to this barrel of apples, and he had to pour them all out on the floor to examine each one to make sure that one wasn't rotten, because if one is rotten, the whole barrel can become rotten. So that's something that I try to practice. The biggest thing, honestly, though, is being willing to admit that you were wrong. That's so difficult for us as humans. It's difficult for us emotionally. It's very difficult for us psychologically. You almost have to go, depending on how strongly you held to a belief and what you invested into it, you almost have to go through an entire grief process. And you have to really be willing to practice humility. And that is something that is not easy at first. It can actually be really painful. And then there's phases of it, right? You go through feelings of anger, like why I was lied to, how dare they, like, and then you have this outrage and a feeling that you need to act out and so forth. And I think being able to navigate admitting that you are wrong is probably the biggest thing. And I mean, it's still tough for me, right? And it's something that I try to model in my organization on my show. And we try to like make it cool. Where it's like, yeah, we were wrong about this. Like, let's talk about it. This is how we figured out, that what we needed to change, or how we got some facts wrong, and address it. And it's not the end of the world. We're moving on, and it's part of growing up, so to speak, as we all grow up every day. And I always say, like, to also not, like, for lack of a better word, like, hate people who hold beliefs that you believe are wrong. Because there are things that are probably wrong that I believe right now, or false. But I don't know that they're false yet. So once I learn that they're false, I hope that I will change my mind accordingly. But having some compassion in that sense. And then the other thing, in terms of being a critical thinker in the more like social aspect that I meant is, my observation is a lot of times when in the sphere of people who talk about critical thinking and free speech, free expression, we tend to be the black cats. We tend to be someone with a little bit of an axe to grind, or, the gadfly, so to speak. We're not talking about the issue of free expression for no reason. It's usually because we've been personally impacted by it, or the implications of it when it's come into our life, when we've come into conflict with others, right? Free speech is important because it protects speech that isn't popular. So we probably, if we're involved in this space, maybe said some things that weren't too popular. Just a guess. And in that sense, like, especially in the issues that I'm involved in, where we talk a lot about the issues of like political Islamism, the issues affecting persecuted apostates, criticisms of dogmatic progressivism, I almost call it, or illiberalism in the West. I tend to say some things that are like very unpopular, and I've taken a cost for that personally in my life. And sometimes people reach out to me and they're like, "Oh, Susanna, like, I'm really inspired by how outspoken you are. You're willing to say things that other people are not. You're willing to talk about controversial issues and still try to be like rational and compassionate about it. I want to get involved in this space. Like, what can I do? Or I'm worried about people getting the wrong impression." To be honest, guys, I just tell them they're going to get the wrong impression. And you just have to be okay with that. Like, I, through my own period of the evolution of my thought and how it continues to evolve, sometimes I go through periods where I experience some anger towards a lot of the people who are willing to agree with me privately, but distance themselves from me publicly. And I had to come to terms with the fact that that is, I guess you would say, like a fundamental part of human nature. And I have to be accepting of the fact that most people have a psychological and sociological purpose to say what is popular over what they believe to be true. And I need to be understanding of that. A lot of people have other things going on in their life, other responsibilities where they cannot jeopardize, caring for those responsibilities because of something that they believe to be true that is unpopular. I just happen to be one of those people who apparently maybe my convictions get the best of me. Yeah, because I'm like, no, I want to say what I believe to be true over what is popular. And I also have to hold myself accountable for the consequences of that. I can't pretend like I didn't know what the reaction was going to be. I can't pretend like I don't know what implications it could have on my life, my relationships, my career opportunities, etc. No one forced me to do this. I felt compelled to do this, and I really try to hold myself accountable for that and not also play into some victim woe is me kind of narrative. Because I am responsible for myself, and I have to be okay with knowing that most people are not going to be willing to be the black sheep the way that I have been willing to, and that's okay. Honestly, that's how society functions at the end of the day. But we need enough of us little black sheep to be doing our own thing and have the ability to do it to be able to push things forward. So that's kind of the perspective that I take to try to keep things healthy.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I mean, one of the main reasons we have created even this podcast and this forum is to hopefully help promote more of a culture where you can share your beliefs, even if unpopular, and not suffer consequence for it. So certainly, I mean, my own ideal, I know Joia shares it, and our at 1776 Forward is that a truly liberal culture, you aren't or shouldn't be sacrificing much to have the views that you do, viewpoint diversity, and even controversial views. So that is certainly what we're all about. And hearing advocates and leaders like yourself tell stories like this, I think helps give people the courage and the confidence to do more of it.
I hope so.
Yeah. Maybe we can wrap it up there. Like, if you have any kind of final words of advice for those people who, perhaps are still struggling to stand up, speak out, speak their minds, express an unpopular opinion. Can you share some words of wisdom, words of advice of how they can start to find that kernel of courage to make their views heard?
I think what helps me is that I am, my opinions change, my thoughts evolve, but I am very strong and secure within my own convictions. So people can make whatever accusation they want against me. I know why I'm doing what I'm doing. I know the people who have benefited from it. People I never would have expected, the teenagers in other countries who fear, honor violence from their families, how they reach out to me, they appreciate it, I am secure within myself at the end of the day. I know that I am not coming from a place of bigotry. I have a deep desire to try to really promote prosperity around the world. So, people can have their own opinions. They can misconstrue things, but I'm secure in why I'm doing what I'm doing, and I interrogate myself often, and I'm comfortable with that. But I think that would be the biggest thing, is just if you stand up in your truth, the people who are benefiting from it will come to you, and they will appreciate it. They really will.
Yeah.
And you just have to grow a tough skin and say, no, it is worth it.
Yeah.
It is worth it.
Well, as the famous saying goes, courage is contagious, and you often don't. I mean, I share your experience as someone who's also been outspoken throughout my life of getting the people who come privately to you and show support, but will never join you publicly when you're out there taking the slings and arrows. And um, I always come for myself with the fact that even I'm getting that response, even if it's in a private forum, at
Yeah.
least shows that you're maybe helping spread that contagion, so to speak, a good kind of courage. So, and I love how you talk about practicing what you preach, because I think that is a core value of integrity, which we preach a lot in our work at 1776 Forward, and I think it's um, you know that's where people know authenticity and they are drawn to it. And to your point, truth stands on its own. So when you actually are modeling the things that you're preaching, then I think it tends to carry more weight and stick with people better as well. So thank you very much for sharing your story and taking some time with us today.
Oh
That
yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's the end of our time. Unfortunately, I have so many other follow-up questions, but we might have you back on for a
I
future
would love
one.
it.
So thank you all for listening. As always, you can find us link to our YouTube videos of the podcast at 1776forward.com or on ILV's website, ilvalues.org, and on all major podcast channels under ILV's Dissidents page. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Thank you.